Welcome back, my fellow watchers of the multiverse, to another Miss the Part What If. And in today's episode, what if events went differently in the Ultimate Universe? The early 2000s Ultimate comic books were very interesting, and to say the least, the Venom saga was such an underrated series, and so this video is dedicated to the Ultimate Universe, and we pose the question, what if Ultimate Spider-Man kept the Venom Symbiote? Now, this storyline will be following, kind of closely almost to the death of Ultimate Spider-Man, and I'm going to be kind of going over, the choices that I would have done personally. But that being said, my fellow watchers of the multiverse, it's amazing to be back and finally at full force. There was a lot of stuff kind of going on behind the scenes that really just didn't motivate me to come back here, and I'm just really glad that that's all out of the way, and we're finally back making videos. There's a ton of videos coming out, so again, you can expect those on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and a couple live streams here and there. I think that's going to be really interesting. But that being said, my fellow watchers of the multiverse, let's dive into the brand new What If episode. The night was thick with rain, the streets of Queens slick with water, as lightning flickered across the sky. Peter Parker crouched atop a dimly lit skyscraper, watching the city pulse beneath him. He had always seen New York as his responsibility, a place he had sworn to protect. But these days, it felt different. The world no longer felt like a weight on his shoulders. It felt like something he had already conquered, because he wasn't just Spider-Man anymore. The Venom Symbiote pulsed against his skin, shifting and breathing as if it had become a part of him. The black suit clung to him like living armor, enhancing every muscle, every reflex, every instinct. At first, it had felt like a dream come true. No more aching bones. No more exhaustion after long nights swinging between skyscrapers. He was faster, stronger, untouchable. His webbing was no longer artificial. It was organic, growing from the suit itself, stronger than steel. He could lift cars with ease, punch through walls without effort. He had become the most powerful Spider-Man this world had ever seen. But something was wrong. The power came with a price. His thoughts had started to change. The anger came easier now. When he fought, he didn't just disable criminals, he hurt them. Thieves and muggers, who once saw Spider-Man as a nuisance, now feared him. He had stopped pulling his punches. And worst of all, he didn't care. The suit whispered to him in ways he couldn't explain, urging him forward, pushing him to let go of his weakness. The hesitation, the fear, the self-doubt, all gone. Tonight had been a quiet night. No major crimes, no explosions, no supervillains trying to rip the city apart. But Peter didn't feel relieved. He felt bored. The thought hit him like a jolt of electricity. But he didn't shake it away. The old Peter Parker would have been grateful for a peaceful night. This Peter Parker wanted a fight. Before he could dwell on it further, his earpiece crackled to life. "Spider-Man," came the gruff voice of Nick Fury. "We need to talk." Peter smirked beneath his mask. "Let me guess. Another world-ending disaster. Come on, Nick, let's be real. I'm kinda overqualified for this street-level stuff." There was a pause on the other end. Then, a much more serious tone. "That's exactly what I'm worried about, kid." The S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier loomed above the clouds, a metal titan drifting above New York. Peter stood on the main deck, arms crossed, as the wind whipped around him. He had been here before, worked alongside S.H.I.E.L.D. before, but this was different. Nick Fury stood in front of him, hands behind his back, watching him carefully. There was something in his eye, something Peter hadn't seen before. Not annoyance, not frustration, concern. "You've changed," Fury finally said. Peter rolled his eyes. "Oh great, here we go. This the part where you tell me I'm too powerful and need to hold back." He gestured to himself. "Newsflash, Fury. I've never been better. I can stop crime before it even happens now. I can take on threats that would have killed me a year ago. You scare people, Parker." That stopped him. Fury took a step forward. "People don't look at Spider-Man like a hero anymore. They look at you like something else, something they don't understand, and that makes you dangerous." Peter clenched his fists, feeling the symbiote shift over his skin. "Dangerous to who? The scumbags I put in the hospital. The guys who used to shoot at me and laugh because they thought I was just some dumb kid? You were a dumb kid." Fury's voice was sharp. "But you had control. Now, I don't know if you do." Peter scoffed, turning away. "You called me up here for a lecture. Thanks, but I think I'll pass." "You don't get it, do you?" Fury's voice dropped lower, more serious. "I'm not here to scold you. I'm here to offer you something." Peter paused. Fury smirked. "You're too big for the streets now, kid. You want to prove you're still a hero? Then stop swinging around Queens and playing small-time protector. Join the Ultimates. Be an Avenger." For the first time since arriving, Peter actually hesitated. An Avenger. It had always been a dream, a joke in the back of his mind. But now, with this power, he could be more than just the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. He could be something greater, and yet something in his gut twisted. "Think about it," Fury said, turning away. "But don't take too long. The world's watching, Parker. They already fear you. Question is, do you want to fix that, or prove them right?" Peter didn't answer. Later that night, Peter found himself on a rooftop overlooking Queens. His body was still buzzing from the conversation with Fury, his mind running through every possibility. Being an Avenger would change everything, but the symbiote, would they even accept him like this? "Peter?" He turned sharply. Mary Jane stood behind him. For a second, he felt relieved. MJ had always been the one person who kept him grounded, who reminded him of the life he had before all of this. But as he looked at her now, he saw something different in her eyes. She was scared. "Everyone's talking about you," she said quietly, stepping closer. "The news, the police, even S.H.I.E.L.D. They're saying you're not the same anymore." Peter sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "MJ, come on, don't start." "I'm serious," she pressed. "I've seen it too. The way you fight now, the way you look at people. This thing, it's changing you." Peter clenched his jaw. The symbiote tensed, reacting to his emotions. "So what? You want me to take it off? Go back to being weak? Go back to almost dying every time some lunatic throws a punch at me?" MJ took a deep breath. I don't want to lose you, Peter." For a second, Peter felt something crack inside him, but then the symbiote whispered, "You don't need her." His expression hardened. "Then maybe you should stop trying to save me." MJ looked at him, really looked at him, and then, with a sad nod, she turned and left. Peter didn't go after her. He didn't even watch her leave. Instead, he turned back to the city, his hands clenched into fists, the symbiote thrumming with energy. Maybe she was right. Maybe he was changing. But maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. The city had never been safer. Criminals weren't just afraid of Spider-Man anymore. They feared him. For the first time since putting on the mask, Peter Parker could sense the shift. The gangs that once laughed at him now scattered at the first sight of his black suit. Muggers didn't even think about pulling a weapon when they saw his glowing white eyes in the shadows. Drug lords and mobsters whispered his name like he was some urban legend, a demon crawling through the streets of New York. This should have been everything he wanted. So why did it feel so empty? Peter crouched on the edge of a skyscraper, watching the city below. His fingers tapped rhythmically against the concrete, his nerves twitching, his senses restless. The symbiote pulsed through his skin like it was alive, whispering to him in ways he couldn't describe. It wasn't words exactly. It was more like a feeling, a hunger, a need for action. The streets were quiet, too quiet. He had wiped out so many threats so quickly that there wasn't much left to fight. The thrill of battle, the adrenaline, the release was missing. The symbiote didn't like that. Neither did he. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice crackling in his earpiece. Spider-Man. Nick Fury's voice was sharp, no longer carrying the same tone of amusement as before. We need to talk now. Peter rolled his eyes. Really, Fury? You're calling me in for another lecture. I'm kind of busy keeping your city safe in case you haven't noticed. This isn't a request, Parker. Fury's voice was harder this time. Get to the Triskelion, immediately. Peter sighed, stretching his arms. Fine. Maybe this would at least be something interesting. And besides, he wasn't in the habit of taking orders anymore. The Triskelion loomed over the Hudson River, a floating fortress built to house the most dangerous criminals in the world. Peter had been here before, but never like this. As soon as he landed, he noticed the difference. Security was tighter. Guards flanked the hallways, watching him like he was one of the inmates. Normally, S.H.I.E.L.D. agents greeted him with casual nods or jokes about his age. Now, they wouldn't even look at him. He could feel the tension in the air. Nick Fury was waiting for him in a dark meeting room, standing in front of a massive screen displaying footage of Spider-Man in action. But these weren't his usual fights. These were brutal. One clip showed him smashing a thug through a concrete wall, leaving the guy motionless on the ground. Another showed him breaking a criminal's wrist so violently that his hand bent the wrong way. Peter frowned. Okay, are we watching my highlight reel? Because this is all starting to feel like a weird fan club. Fury didn't laugh, didn't even crack a smirk. Instead, he turned and stared at Peter. Tell me the truth, kid. Do you even recognize yourself anymore? Peter felt something tighten in his chest, but almost immediately the symbiote whispered in the back of his mind, feeding his anger. They're weak. They're afraid of us. His fingers curled into fists. So what? I hit a little harder. I win my fights faster. That's what you wanted, right? The world's safer because of me. At what cost? Fury's voice was low, dangerous. People are scared of you, Parker. And not just the criminals. Civilians, police, your own friends. Peter scoffed, shaking his head. Oh please, you're acting like I've turned into the freaking Punisher. Fury pressed a button on the console. Another video played. This time it was different. It was a security recording from earlier that night. Footage of Peter standing over a criminal who was already beaten and down. But Peter wasn't stopping. He kept hitting him, again and again. The symbiote had extended over his arm, forming claws. Peter was seconds away from tearing into the guy's skull. Then, the footage ended. Peter's mouth felt dry. He didn't even remember that happening. Fury took a slow step forward. This thing you're wearing. It's not just making you stronger, it's changing you. And if you think I'm gonna sit here and let that happen... Peter laughed, a low, bitter chuckle. Let that happen. He took a step forward And for the first time, Nick Fury took a step back. "You think you let me do anything, Fury? I don't need your permission. I don't need your approval." His voice lowered. "I don't need S.H.I.E.L.D. And with that, he turned and walked out. The guards moved to block his way. Peter didn't stop walking. The symbiote surged to life, twisting over his arms. And for the first time since arriving, S.H.I.E.L.D. didn't try to stop him. Deep in the shadows of Oscorp, Norman Osborn watched the security footage with a slow, widening grin. Spider-Man had kept the symbiote, and that meant he had taken Norman's greatest creation and made it his own. The lab was filled with glass tubes containing remnants of Osborn's failed experiments, failed clones, failed attempts to recreate the Oz formula. But he didn't need the formula anymore, not if he could take back what was rightfully his. He flexed his massive, clawed fingers. His body, still pulsing with fire and inhuman strength, crackled as he moved. The ultimate Green Goblin was reborn, and this time he wasn't after Peter Parker. He was after Venom. Peter swung through the city, his thoughts a blur. His rage had been burning for days ever since leaving S.H.I.E.L.D. But for the first time, he felt something else. Doubt. His memories were starting to break apart. There were moments, flashes of fights, screams, broken bones where he couldn't remember what had happened. He would wake up, his knuckles raw, his suit stained in blood, and it was getting worse. Then, he heard it. "Peter!" He landed on a rooftop, turning to see Mary Jane running toward him. Her eyes were red from crying. "I know what's happening to you," she said, her voice shaking. "And I know you don't think you can stop it. But Peter, please, you can still walk away from this." Peter opened his mouth, but then the symbiote surged over his face, forming his monstrous mask. Walk away? He grinned, fangs glinting in the moonlight. "I don't think I want to." MJ took a step back, horrified, and somewhere deep inside, the real Peter Parker screamed. The rain came down in thick sheets, washing over the ruined streets of New York. Sirens wailed in the distance, barely audible over the crackle of fire that consumed the wreckage of Oscorp Tower. The city was in chaos. Explosions had torn through entire blocks. Police and S.H.I.E.L.D. agents were locked in battles with criminals emboldened by the power vacuum. But none of it mattered now, because tonight Spider-Man was going to die. Peter Parker stood in the center of the devastation, his black symbiote suit twisting and pulsing like a living thing. His breath came in ragged gasps, his body trembling, not from exhaustion but from something worse. The symbiote felt different now, colder, distant. For the first time in weeks, he felt weak. Across from him, standing amidst the wreckage, was Norman Osborn. But this wasn't just the Green Goblin. This was something worse. The symbiote had abandoned Peter only moments ago, betraying him in his weakest moment and bonding with Osborn instead. Now, Norman stood before him, his monstrous goblin form merged with the black tendrils of Venom. His fire-coated body was now encased in a writhing mass of living darkness, his eyes glowing with an unholy fury. The ultimate Venom Goblin. Peter had never felt so small. The moment he lost the suit, he realized just how much it had been carrying him. He could feel the old injuries returning, the fractured ribs, the aching muscles, the exhaustion he had ignored for months. He was just a kid again, just Peter Parker. And Peter Parker was about to die. "Look at you," Osborn's voice boomed, deep and layered as the symbiote twisted around his massive form. His talons scraped against the pavement as he loomed over Peter, his grotesque grin stretching unnaturally wide. "All that power, Parker, and you still lost it, just like I knew you would." Peter staggered to his feet, coughing blood. His ribs were cracked, his vision blurred, but he refused to stay down. "Yeah, "Well, joke's on you," he muttered. "I've got a really bad habit of not staying dead." Osborn roared in fury and lunged. Peter barely dodged. The ground where he had been standing erupted into debris as the goblin's fist smashed into the pavement. He flipped backward, launching a desperate web at Osborn's face, but the Venom Symbiote absorbed it instantly. "You're nothing without the suit," Osborn taunted, his claws swiping dangerously close. Peter gritted his teeth. He knew it was true. He was slower now, weaker. Every movement felt like a struggle, but that didn't mean he was going to quit. Summoning every ounce of strength he had left, Peter charged. He ducked under Osborn's next attack, rolling between his legs and firing a web at the remains of a collapsed building. With a desperate pull, he brought the structure down on top of the goblin. Boom! The explosion sent shockwaves through the street, concrete and metal collapsing into a massive pile of rubble. Peter panted, hands on his knees. He could barely stand, but then the rubble shifted. Osborn burst through, completely unharmed. Peter's heart sank. Osborn tilted his head. "You're out of tricks, kid." And then, before Peter could move, a massive clawed hand slammed into his chest. The force was unimaginable. Peter felt his ribs shatter. The world spun. His body was airborne. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. And then, he crashed through a car windshield, landing in a broken heap on the pavement. His vision swam. Everything hurt. He tried to move, but his limbs wouldn't respond. This was it. This was how it ended. Through the haze of pain, he heard a voice. "Peter!" His eyes fluttered open. Mary Jane was running toward him, tears in her eyes. Behind her, Aunt May stood frozen in shock, her hands covering her mouth. No, they shouldn't be here. Peter tried to speak, but his voice came out as a weak gasp. MJ fell to her knees beside him, gripping his hand. "Stay with me, Tiger, please." Peter tried to smile. I hate that nickname." His voice was barely a whisper. MJ let out a breathless laugh, but it was broken with sobs. Aunt May dropped beside them, brushing his bloody hair back. "Oh, Peter, my boy." He wanted to tell her he was okay, but that would be a lie. His chest felt heavy, his limbs numb, his body had nothing left. He turned his head slightly, looking up at Mary Jane. "I tried," he whispered. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she gripped his hand tighter. "I know," she choked out. "You always do." Peter felt the world fading. He had always known this was a possibility, but deep down, he had never really believed it. He had always thought there would be one last trick, one last fight, but not this time. This was really it. With the last of his strength, he turned his head toward Aunt May. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Her face crumpled with grief, and then Peter Parker closed his eyes, and the world went dark. The funeral was small, private. Only those closest to him were there. Mary Jane, Aunt May, Gwen Stacy, Johnny Storm, Nick Fury watching from a distance. The city mourned in silence. For the first time in years, New York had no Spider-Man. Or so they thought. Miles Morales stood in the shadows, gripping the mask in his hands. Peter had once saved his life, and now it was his turn to do the same for the city. Deep beneath the rubble of Oscorp Tower, something moved. A dark, shifting mass of black tendrils slithered through the ruins. The symbiote was not dead, and it was looking for a new host. And if you guys did enjoy today's Marvel's What If video, I would highly recommend that you check out the other videos because there's so many different fan fictions, so many different what ifs. But I do want to say that your support over these last couple weeks have really been crucial for me, and I personally have been going through quite a bit. I'm not really going to go into a lot of details other than the fact that, yeah, like I just haven't had the same motivation that I had previously. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, the motivation's gone. I mean, it's come back. And so I am very happy that, you know, we're going to be doing a ton of new videos, a ton of new content, and we're going to be doing a brand new podcast along with Thick Talk that will be returning soon. But there's another podcast that I'm going to be doing with a couple buddies of mine from school, so we're going to be doing that really soon, and you guys can, you know, kind of see a little teaser at the end of this video. But again, I do want to say thank you guys so much for the support, even on Patreon. Your support really goes a long way to keeping these videos and keeping myself, you know, continuing on. So it really means a lot. And again, I can't thank you guys enough. The fan base, you guys are some of the best fans out there. And I know I haven't been pulling my weight these days, but I can assure you that stick with me. We got a ton of fantastic videos coming soon, and I can't wait to dive into them. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Do make sure to subscribe, like, share, and turn those notifications on so you and your friends are all up to date with the latest content. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care and have a wonderful day. Peace out.